Johnny here. Today's video, we're going to be talking about the 5 easy steps to diagnosing hypothyroidism. We'll be diving into the topic and just kind of talking about obviously the conventional, but also the more subtle ways that we can look at to say maybe you have a low thyroid or a functional hypothyroid. Your thyroid is not functioning optimally, but maybe it's not high enough to be picked up by your conventional MD. So we're going to dive into all of these topics today. Really excited to do that. Please make sure you like and subscribe. Love to see your comments down below as well. So out of the gates, hypothyroidism. What is hypothyroidism? So we have our primary hypothyroidism diagnosis, which is you have a high level of TSH. So TSH is a brain hormone. TSH, it's inverse. So it goes high as your T4 and your T3, your more inactive and your active thyroid hormones go down. So TSH goes up as T4 is going down. Think of it as if you're a parent listening to this, it's like talking to your kids. Your kids don't listen to you. You raise the volume of your voice. If your brain is not feeling like your thyroid's listening and making the thyroid hormone it needs, the volume goes up as that T4 goes down. Again, T4 is more relatively inactive. It still has metabolic effects, but T3 is going to be 300 to 400% more active than T4. So T4 does have a strong feedback loop to TSH. T3 does have a feedback loop as well. So I've seen patients don't even take T4, they take T3, and T3 can still feed back and drop TSH. But ideally, you want both because T4 does have roles in the body. And so it's good to have both in there. That's why having a non-desiccated thyroid glandular that has T4, T3, and then of course we don't even talk about it, but T2. T2 also plays an important role metabolically. You test it in research centers or in universities, but they don't really have a conventional test that you can get at like LabCorp Quest. So of course our primary is going to be that TSH just being high. Now, most labs will say anything about 4.5 to 5.5 is usually considered flagged. The American Clinical Endocrinologist Society, I think it's ACE, for instance, they say anything 2.5 or above 2.5 starts to become more problematic. Not that you'd say you have hypothyroid, but you'd say, hey, maybe there's a little bit of dysregulation at the pituitary level, talking to the thyroid downstream. So I'll start to use that 2.5 to 3 cutoff of TSH, where your conventional person will look at 4.5 to 5.5, depending. Again, you'll see maybe a 5.5 on the East Coast and a 4.5 on the West Coast because they'll do it based off of standard deviations in all of the data coming in from the general population. So it'll change based on areas, but 4.5 to 5.5 is typically will get you that flagged red mark saying there's a problem. Next is your TSH could be okay, could be, let's say, under 3. And your T4 is starting to drop. Now it's starting to drop maybe below 1, right? That T4 free range usually on a lab is like 0.8 to 1.6 T4 free. So when it starts to go below 1, it starts to become problematic. I'm like, all right, there may be start to be a problem. You're below 1, or you could even go down to 0.9, 0.8, right? Start to become a little bit problematic, but because there's dysregulation, that pituitary is not picking up that drop, and that TSH is still staying in range. It should be shooting up to say, hey, wake up, thyroid, make more T4, but it's not. So we could see that T4 start to drop. That's way number 2 that we would signify maybe a hypothyroid issue. So of course we have our TSH, we have the overt elevation, 4.5 to 5.5 or above, or we have our subtle elevation at 2.5 to 3 or above, okay, more subtle. And then we have our T4 starting to drop. T4 free will be the main one we'll look at. There's T4 total, which looks at the overall output, but free is more functional, right? There's less of it, only about 2 to 5% of hormone is free, and that's less of it. So we get a window to see how that functional hormone's looking. We'd also say maybe T3 issues. Maybe T4 is good. Maybe we have a conversion issue. Maybe T3 is in that bottom 10% of the lab range. And there's a problem there. Maybe there's enough T4. It's feeding back the TSH and it's saying, hey, we're okay. We have enough levels. TSH is good. But that T3 is starting to go low in that bottom 10% of the lab range. So now way number 3 would be that low T3. Now, you may start to have low thyroid hormones, low thyroid symptoms this entire time. This could be cold hands, cold feet. That's conventional, kind of a telltale sign. Eyebrow thinning on the outer third. It could be hair loss in general. It could be constipation. It could be mood issues. It could be fatigue. All of those things are patented low thyroid. So we have our TSH issues, our T4 or T3. So that low T3, that could be a conversion issue, right? Other things can cause conversion problems too. There could be a cortisol imbalance that's driving that T4 to T3. It could be overly high or low. It could be an insulin issue. too high, like your insulin resistance, the most common way, or if you're super low calorie and low carb, maybe you have an eating issue, that could also drive insulin super low, and that could also maybe impair conversion too. So those are a couple of more common ways that I see. Next would be Hashimoto's. Now we have a autoimmune issue in the background. Maybe that autoimmune attack, we may see elevated TPO antibodies, thyroid peroxidase antibodies, that's TPO, or thyroglobulin or anti-thyroglobulin antibodies. Same thing, just said a couple different ways. Those are the two main antibodies we'll see for Hashimoto's. And that could be elevated, and that could be attacking that thyroid gland, and then that T4 is just spewing out, which could be causing dysregulation of the TSH. And you may have lower thyroid, but you had an attack and that popped the thyroid up for a little bit, making the TSH go down, and you looked okay, but those antibodies could be spiking. So thyroid antibodies could be a really important player in this autoimmune issue. So you got to look at the thyroid antibodies. And I'd say 10% of the population could be seronegative when it comes to Hashimoto's. So you may not have any systemic antibodies. Most of your antibodies are more peripheral in the tissue. And so you may run TPO and thyroglobulin, and it may not even come back. And this is where an ultrasound could be helpful to see if that tissue is inflamed via an ultrasound. It's possible. And so your fifth way could be looking at an ultrasound to see if that tissue looks inflamed because of that 10% seronegative. So it's good to have all these tools in your back pocket. We can see TSH, T4, T3. We can see thyroid antibodies, and then 10% seronegative, where we have to do an ultrasound to look deeper at what could be going on with the tissue. Now, again, if you have an autoimmune issue, you have to get to the root cause, because conventional medicine typically just recommends immunosuppressants or steroids when it comes to autoimmune issues. With thyroid, they typically don't recommend anything because the side effects of the drugs tend to be worse than the actual thyroid issue itself. Usually they give immunosuppressants and those kind of things with like lupus or MS or like more severe autoimmune conditions. So if you want to dive deeper here, we'll put some videos on other topics on Hashimoto's and thyroid where you can kind of go deeper into that. And again, we'll put comments down below here. I'd love to see it. And Dr. J, I see patients all over the world on the functional medicine side. So if you want to dive in deeper with myself, Dr. J, there'll be a link down below where you can reach out and you can schedule and get more support to look at your thyroid and figure out what the underlying driving factors are that could be impacting your thyroid. And again, there'll be the Thyroid Reboot book coming out very shortly. So make sure you subscribe to the newsletter so you get notifications of when that happens. All right, guys, links down below. Have an awesome day. Take care. Bye.